in for a treat today. We're here with two amazing entrepreneurs. Really, the reason why they're doing this is they wanted to highlight local entrepreneurs to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. You're going to hear a lot more about Jonathan during this interview, but I wanted to take a moment to introduce his interviewer, Cindy. Cindy is an award-winning published scientist, and she is now a serial entrepreneur, having co-founded Experiment and Jelly, which offers equitable platforms for scientists. And Cindy's probably going to talk more about herself while the interview develops. So I'm really looking forward to a vibrant conversation, and thank you so much for doing this. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Tracy.
Really excited to be here. All right. Well, I'm Cindy, and this is Jonathan. And today, I feel very lucky to have Jonathan as a guest because Jonathan's one of my favorite founders. Jonathan and I met maybe a year and a half ago.
Yeah, just about.
Surfing canoes at Waikiki, if anyone's familiar with canoes at Waikiki. And when we first met, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about a shared, desire to make Hawaii better. We talked about starting companies, having no experience. We talked about writing. We talked about potentially getting politically involved out of necessity. And I came away from that surf session with this renewed sense of optimism, kind of like I had found my people. And so, yeah, what do you remember from that day?
I remember feeling a lot of the same, and actually the way that I reached out to you on Slack because I had watched a previous PACE video, the talk that you did, I think a year or two before that. So it's kind of funny how it's coming full circle. But yeah, in a similar way, moving out here, there's not a ton of people in tech, there's not a ton of people in startups, or if there are, I think they're really isolated. And so you had already assembled this awesome group of people who are already in tech or already in startups. And so it's cool to just show up and be like, I don't know, feel like we've known each other for a while, mainly because we shared a lot of similar principles and similar interests. So it was amazing to find. It felt like I knew people like that were out there in Hawaii, and it was really cool to actually meet them in person and doing something that both of us love doing.
Surfing.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Wahiawa, and you are one of 5 kids. You're the second oldest. What was it like growing up?
Being one of 5 kids, and we had always grown up in a small house, so you're never alone. I remember I've never had my own room. I think I had it for a couple of months when maybe my sister moved out, but I'd always been sharing a room with my brothers or my sister. You never have any amount of personal space. So that was one of the things that I really remember. And then you go to college, and it's the same thing. You're in a dorm room, you're sharing a room with someone else. So it's like, oh yeah, this is normal. But yeah, I remember always being around my siblings.
When did you get your own room?
I guess in college after I moved out of the dorms and got an apartment with one of my previous roommates. That was the first time I think I was 20 years old, 21 years old.
Did it feel weird?
Oh my God, it felt amazing. The room that I would share with my, when I was in high school with my youngest sister was, I don't know, maybe a 10 by 10 or 12 by 12. And so to go into a room that's bigger than that and have it all to yourself, not a bunk bed, it was amazing. I was like, oh my God, this is how kings must live. Yeah.
So, Wahiawa, you went to high school. You had some incredibly supportive teachers there, including Mr. Miranda. Tell us more about Mr. Miranda.
Yeah, Mr. Miranda was my English teacher, and he was awesome. He was always super supportive. I felt the thing that I really remember and really respected about Mr. Miranda is he was one of those teachers who would go out of his way to get you really excited about the topic. And I remember he would just give me new vocabulary that I was just really into. It sounds really nerdy now that I was really into vocabulary, or different books and stuff like that. He ended up writing a book himself, and I read it and I really loved it. But he was just a local boy from Eva Beach and just got really, I don't know, just exemplified what you can do with that kind of storytelling and creativity. And I thought he did a great job fostering that, for me personally at least.
Did it encourage you to want to write more?
Yeah, graduating high school, I think my history teacher, we did this little superlatives things, and she said that her prediction for me was that I would be writing Dan Brown novels.
Who's Dan Brown?
Dan Brown is actually not, he's probably my least favorite writer just because he wrote DaVinci Code.
Okay.
And a couple other, I don't know, kind of formulaic books. But
he's a big deal though. DaVinci Code
is
a
big deal, yeah. A lot of people probably know the DaVinci Code. Yeah, that was I think what everybody thought I was going to do. They thought I was going to be a writer because I was so into writing and English and literature and stuff like that.
What about writing interests you?
I think part of me actually liked more of the story than the actual act of writing, but writing it felt like it was something that really clarified the way that I was thinking or the way that I was feeling, and sometimes I would just write things that maybe had no start or no end, but they were just kind of in the middle. I remember in college, I went to one of my teachers, and he was my sociology teacher, and I was like, oh my God, I've got this amazing idea for this utopian world that's like based on like socioeconomic stuff, and I just had a dream about it the night before, and so I stayed up all night and I was writing the core piece of it, and I go to him and I told him this, and he was just like, yeah, he's like, people have done that before. Also, I was failing that class. So he's like, why don't we talk about how you're doing in this class? But yeah, I love writing. I love kind of what it does for the way that I think and expresses the way that I feel.
So after high school, college, was college something you always knew you wanted to do?
I think so. I think growing up, I always, I feel like I fit into a lot of the things that society expected of you. And when I was a young kid, my mom said that I wanted to be like a lawyer, which sounds like the most, I don't know, not that interesting to me now. And I think of those, it was be a lawyer, have kids, go to college, get a stable job. And of those, I mean, the only one that I actually did, I guess, was, well, I guess I've done a couple of those now, but going to college was always the one that I felt like I was going to do.
Do you remember why you wanted to be a lawyer when you were a kid? It's an interesting choice as a kid.
Yeah, Asian parents, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, one of those things.
Got it. So college is expensive. How did you choose which college to go to? How did you apply? How did you pay for it?
Yeah, so I thought I wanted to be a writer. And the practical answer to that, my dad was like, how are you going to make money writing? I was like, okay, fine, I'll go into journalism. And he kept trying to push me to think about how I would make money from this. So I was like, okay, I'll do journalism. My parents could only afford to do the college applications for, I think whatever the bare minimum was it was 4. And so after that, you had to pay for every additional school. So they were like, you have to apply to UH. It's and that's what we can afford. We can send you here locally. And then you can pick whatever 3 you want. And so I went through the list on College Board or one of those websites, and I just picked the top schools in journalism, and I just early applied to all of them. I said, whichever one I get into, I'm going to go to. I'd never visited any of them. I think I'd only just read about some of them, but BU was one of them. And I just kind of hoped I would figure it out and how to get in, and I tried my best to get scholarships and things like that ahead of time. But I really had no plan other than I'm going to try to go to the best school that I can.
And you succeeded.
I succeeded. Thankfully, I got a lot of financial aid and of scholarships, and I got, eventually 2 part-time jobs while going to school. So succeeded, barely by the skin of my teeth, but it worked out.
So when you left Hawaii for Boston, did you go by yourself?
Yeah, my parents also couldn't afford to come out with me. So they packed me in a little suitcase, and then I got on a plane and I went out there.
What was it like landing at the airport?
Gosh, I don't even remember the airport experience. I remember it being one of the biggest airports I'd ever been in. The thing I remember the most was just walking around and seeing buildings made out of red brick. And growing up in Wahiawa, the only things that are red is the dirt around you. And you're like, oh, they made bricks out of that stuff. And walking down this cobblestone area, and you're just like dragging a way too big suitcase, and it just felt like, I don't know, not very sophisticated. It was, I think, also my first time taking a cab, back when cabs were still the main way that you got around. So that was all really bizarre.
And then the weather in Boston is very different from the weather in Hawaii. How did you figure out what to wear for winter?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that I took for granted that we don't know about in Hawaii. The weather, I went to Urban Outfitters, which, like, if you've been to the mainland, maybe most people know now, like, Urban Outfitters is not winter clothing. But, you know, when you watch movies, they've all got those, like, fuzzy hoods, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm gonna wear. Like, people must wear those fuzzy hood things. Turns out, Boston weather, it is so wet and rainy when it snows. It's not like the soft, dry powder. Like, sometimes you'll get that, but it's just rain. And then this, like, furry mink thing gets so gross, like, right away. And I'm already wearing this, like, not water resistant, you know, I don't know, $80 jacket, which you have to spend like 4 times that amount to get a good winter coat. And it's just miserable. It was miserable. Thankfully, the winter the first year was not that bad, but I remember that being just particularly embarrassing.
So what you're saying is, if anyone in the audience moves from Hawaii to Boston, don't buy this coat, and don't, or if you buy it, don't wear it while it's snowy or wet.
Yeah, ask somebody else who lives there and just get them to take you shopping or something. The other thing I didn't have was a bank account. We don't have national banks in Hawaii.
Oh yeah, we never figured out why that is. Next
David
time.
is supposed to tell us that. Yeah, we don't have, so I had to go sign up for a Century bank account, or like a Bank of America. And I picked whichever one had free pizza that day. Like you do in college, that's how you make most of your decisions.
Cheese, pepperoni, do you remember the type of pizza?
Oh, it was always pepperoni. I don't know, not very creative.
Pepperoni might be the best pizza. So during college, you said you were working 2 jobs, right? You were working a lot. Weren't you tired?
Yeah. That's sociology, the sociology class that I was in. My intention going into every class was like, I'm gonna give this my all. I'm gonna really focus this time. And I would go to this class, and this guy, I would sit like this far away from him, because I'm like, I'm gonna sit in front of the class. I'm gonna definitely listen to this. And within 20 minutes, I would be out. I would just be asleep at the front of the class. And I would do this every single week. Just, you know, with best intentions, this is gonna be the week that I'm gonna pay attention. But I was so tired. I was working 2 jobs. And yeah, I think I passed. I barely passed that class. But yeah.
I did a similar thing in my biochemistry class. I would also sit in the very front row and immediately pass out.
It's hard. It's so hard to stay away. And, you know, it gets hot in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are a lot of influences there that were not great.
So you chose journalism as a major, and at that time, was it like 2009, 2008-ish when you were in college?
2006, 2010.
There's like a tiny revolution happening in the digital journalism space. How did that affect your college career and what you chose to spend your labor on, I guess?
Yeah, I think at that point, like 2008, or you know, my sophomore, junior year, I was already starting to have doubts that I really wanted to be a journalist. You know, the things that you would do, like writing is really different from reporting. Some of my friends, especially the broadcast journalists, would say, wow, this would be the best job. Like they would be covering sports. They're like, this would be the best job if we didn't have to report on it. And yeah, when you have to report, you have to ask really hard questions. Like you have to do a lot of travel. And sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, the things that you report on don't end up becoming stories. And you may or may not get paid for that, even though you maybe poured your heart and soul and you did some, like a lot of legwork. And sometimes you had to put yourself in really vulnerable positions or go to people who were themselves in really vulnerable positions and have to really talk. So anyway, I was like, okay, maybe this isn't for me. This is a really difficult job. But yeah, that people started to go online, like people who were previously just writers were expected to do digital content, multimedia, make websites or report live, use things like Twitter. And it really was in my favor because, you know, some of these classes that I was falling asleep in, I was able to do that in part because I was so good at doing like InDesign layouts, right? Like print layouts. I knew Photoshop or InDesign and all of those tools really well. I knew how to make websites. And so they're like, oh yeah, the assignment for this semester is like, you're gonna make a multimedia website, and I'd be done in like 2 weeks. and then I would just sleep the whole rest of the class. That's basically how I got by.
How did you pick up those skills?
Sleeping?
No,
came
not sleeping.
naturally to me, believe it or not.
Design and like web stuff.
So similar with schools, in order to pay for school, one of the requirements for, I think one of the scholarships or grants I had was that I had to get a on-campus job. And so I took all of the on-campus jobs and I ranked them by whichever paid the most. And then I taught myself how to do it. And one of them was help desk in the College of Fine Arts. And the person that ran that was really innovative. They had their own ticketing system, and they had built some cobbled together open source tools to make their own service desk essentially. And so I started picking up how to code from them and doing more of that. And then, I started interning, or I guess working for a couple of students who had graduated a couple years before me. And they were just, they'd started their own web development shop. They were making web apps and websites for people. And so I started working with them and kind of went in and, built out some of their team with people that used to work with me at the computer lab. And we started making websites and web apps and getting more and more into it. And that was probably by, my sophomore year or junior year, that we had a team of 4 or 5 people doing that. And then that's kind of how I picked up the web stuff.
Mm-hmm. And was that before or after your time at the Honolulu Advertiser?
That was right in the middle, I think. I ended up being an intern in the Honolulu Advertiser in their graphics department. So I'd already done some graphic design stuff for website layouts. And so, it just ended up being really simple to do that.
How did it feel being back in Hawaii was it a summer for your internship?
Yeah. It was actually really different. Growing up in Wahiawa, we never really came to town. Or if we did, it was just a family thing. We would go to Ward area or something like that for dinner as a family. But it was my first time actually being in downtown and, being there for more than just an afternoon. So it was cool. It felt like I finally understood what the urban environment was here.
It seems that there's a theme where you seem very resourceful. And I often find that resourcefulness is a key trait for early stage founders that go from 0 to 1. I'm curious if you looked for that trait or other traits in the founders you ended up deciding to work for after college.
I wish I could say I did. Honestly, I had no idea. David Cancel from Performable. I think I did a little bit of research, but as a kid out of college, I had no idea what to look for and how to know who to sign up with. At the time they were working out of Amesbury, which was an hour-and-a-half drive north of Boston.
That's far.
It was far. I also didn't have a car, and so I had to carpool with people. And so I would go to their place via the train at 6 in the morning, and then carpool with them, and then carpool back, and then take the train. So it was an hour-and-a-half each way commute. And I was falling asleep a lot then too, but only in the car ride, thankfully.
Good thing you weren't driving.
I know. But I don't know. I don't think I knew what to look for. I think I learned a lot of those behaviors from those people in some ways too. I think there's being resourceful or being creative, and then there's applying it in the real world to get, sort of value out of it. I think I learned a lot of that from people like David Cancel.
And then Performable ended up being acquired by HubSpot. Can you tell us about that day and how you learned about the acquisition?
Yeah. So my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she and I were supposed to go on a vacation. We were supposed to go on a weekend. And so I told my boss, I was like, hey, by the way, I'm going to be out of town, this weekend, blah, blah, blah. And I told him a month in advance. And then he comes to me, and I was just like, hey, by the way, just a reminder, I'm out this Friday. And he's like, this Friday? He's like, no, you can't go. And I was like, okay, why? And he's like, I can't tell you. They're supposed to be really secretive about it. You can't tell everybody. Only select people can know about it. Otherwise, it falls through, and it's really bad. And so he's like, I can't tell you why. I just need you to be here. And so I'm sitting there on Friday at 4:30 and just staring holes in the back of his head, waiting for some magical event to happen. And nothing happens. And then I have my suitcase there because we're supposed to take a flight. And I was like, Elias, what the hell? And he's like, oh, did you mean this Friday? I meant next Friday.
Wow.
Anyway, so I'm just okay, I'm expecting some big meeting to happen on Friday. And then they wheel us in, they take us into a conference room, And then in come the founders of HubSpot. This is like 8 in the morning. In comes the founders of HubSpot, and they're like, "Congrats, you've been acquired." Like, I don't know, we're your new parents or something like that. And they're like, "Oh, weird. Like yesterday we thought you guys were the enemy, and today you're our, now we're on the same team. That's kind of weird." And then they're like, "Here's champagne." And it's like 8 in the morning, and I'm like, "All right, fine." But then after that, they load us up onto a bus, and then they wheel us to their headquarters, and sort of like a little bit of a dog and pony show, where now they wheel like us 15 people in front of an audience of like 300 of their people, and they're like, "These are the people we just acquired."
And were they surprised too?
Yeah, they had no idea too, because they can't tell them, and they're like, "Hey, good to meet you, I guess. Like, yesterday we didn't like you, and now today I guess we're supposed to get along." So, yeah, that was a little funny. We mostly worked it out. There were definitely some growing pains there, but yeah, it was a very bizarre experience.
Did you have any doubts about joining HubSpot?
Yeah, I mean, the tension at the time was like, we were way smaller than them as a company. We were also, in the same zip code in Cambridge, so it was there was a lot of turf war there. So we always thought that we were going to be, like, we were way better than them, and like, oh, we know how to build product. And so going in, I think we came with a lot of that same attitude. It didn't really serve us very well, like not a very collaborative environment to go in when you're, you have the idea of superiority of someone else. But they had some things that were really, really strong, and I think we kind of found that out of each other.
What were you working on when you joined HubSpot?
I ended up dabbling in a number of different things, but I was a front-end engineer, so I mostly worked on UI. I did like analytics and dashboards, and I got really into email, like HTML emails, which it's actually a nightmare to work on, but I found it really interesting. And the last thing I worked on was their social media tools.
And did you work like 9 to 5, or do you work weekends, evenings?
Yeah, I was actually, so when I was at Performable, I started in support there, and then transitioned into doing a little bit of coding right before the acquisition, and then at the acquisition I was full-time software engineer. This is really my first real like big kid job as a software engineer, and like, I don't know, maybe other people didn't think this, but I just felt like I was so far behind everybody else, and so just getting the same result, like trying to deliver on the same deadlines, took me so much longer. I was basically living there all the time. It was me, maybe one other person. Actually a good friend of mine now, Guru. We were the only two. We would see each other on Saturday, like every Saturday.
Do you know why he was there?
He's got a weird story. I think he actually at one point didn't have a debit card, and so he was just kind of living off of the snacks he was a Canadian national. And yet, later on I realized we were talking about this just a couple of years ago, and he was like, yeah, there was a point at which he didn't have a bank account. There was like some weird thing where he forgot to set it up, and he couldn't go back to go set it up. And so he was really just eating the cereal and the yogurt that was at the office for like 2 or 3 months.
I did that for many months too at an office.
It's not that bad actually. But yeah, I was working like really late nights. We'd go out sometimes with friends, grab some dinner, and then I'd come back to the office and work late. There are some perks there.
Mm-hmm. And then something happened, and you felt like something else was calling, and you left HubSpot pretty suddenly. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was a moment where, HubSpot had this challenge. I'd say maybe not a problem per se, but the way that they were onboarding people to their software was you had to pay $3,000, and then a human would teach you how to use it over the course of like a couple of months. And it sounds kind of bizarre now because like imagine when you sign up for Uber or I don't know, anything, GitHub, and you have to pay money to use it, and then you have to have a phone call like once a week for 2 months with somebody to teach you how to use it. You would never use it.
It's pretty ridiculous.
It's pretty ridiculous. And you're already also paying them a subscription. So like on top of that, there's a required onboarding fee. So yeah, it sounds ridiculous now. That was kind of the state of the art at the time. And me as a front-end engineer, I'm like, well, here I am building these social media tools. And it's just like knowing nobody's going to know how to use them. Like they've got 5 minutes in their week to use social media. It's just not their full-time job. So I was like, how do I make this really effective for them? How do I make it like really easy for them to use? And I started going down this rabbit hole of like, user onboarding and like how are other people doing it, like look at Pinterest, like they're super cool. And I'm thinking about all these engaging experiences and talking to other people in the organization, and I was like, hey, you guys literally do this every single day manually. Like, why isn't this part of the product? Like, how should it be part of the product? And what I realized is that those people were the ones who should be designing the interface, not me. Like, I was in engineering. I was like, why am I making the onboarding experience for this thing? I've never onboarded anybody. Like, they are the ones that need tools. And yeah, I was just going up and down on this sort of like emotional roller coaster of like existential meaning in the things that I'm making. And that's when David Cancel, who's then the chief product officer, came by my desk and he was like, hey, it seems like you're either like 110% or you're like down here at 30%. And you've been like at 30% for a little while now. So like, here's some ideas of things you could work on next that, that you might be more excited about. Let's talk about it in a week. And so I talked with him again in a week, and I was like, yeah, I just can't get excited about any of those things. Like, and he's like, well, what are you excited about? And I started talking about this problem, and I was like, yeah, there's things, onboarding, like all these other companies are doing the same thing, and it's all broken, and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, yeah, the way you light up about that, that's like, that's something that you're really passionate about. Like, and if you're passionate about something, like, don't worry about me. Like, we live long lives. I remember he said that. He's like, we live long lives. Like, if it's not this job that we work together, it could be the next one. And I said to him, I was like, hey, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think that's great advice. I guess this is my 2 weeks notice. And I just quit right there. And he was like, well, I'm out of time right now. So cool, let's talk about this later. And then, yeah, they had me stay for a little bit longer than that. But I had no other plan. I just not accidentally, but like kind of accidentally quit that job just because I got so fired up about something.
So then that eventually led to Appcues.
Yeah.
And at the time you were solo founder. Being a founder on a co-founding team is lonely enough. I can't imagine how lonely being a solo founder is. Can you tell us about what the first 3 months of figuring out what you're gonna do looked like?
Yeah, I tell people this and I say, so that's the story. Everyone's like, oh my God, that's so amazing. And I'm like, don't do that because it's a terrible idea. It turns out legally, after you've declared you're gonna leave, you can't try to poach people, right? Like you sign this non-solicitation agreement. And so now I've already told people I'm going to leave. And so it was really hard for me, and actually illegal for me, to say like, hey, my good friends who I've worked with for a really long time, like, you should leave too with me right now.
Oh, so you gotta leave like as a group.
You have to leave as a group. You have to sort of plan this ahead of time and leave as a group. Otherwise, technically, usually not legal. And I made that mistake. And so I'm just like, oh man, I'm on the outside now. And so yeah, I did all the other stuff. I sort of incorporated and did some of the legal stuff. And then I had to find like first customers. And what actually happened was maybe a month before that, I got invited to this event with the CEO, and they picked me out of the engineering team because they're like, you can talk to people. Like you're gonna represent the engineering team at this like award ceremony that we're going to. And there was a party afterward with all the other award attendees. And Brian Halligan, the CEO, told me, he was like, hey, he was talking to another person and I happened to come by and he was like, this is my best engineer. Don't steal him. And then he's like, okay, I gotta go. And it was like to another CEO, I was not the best engineer, but he's just a really flattering person and he said that. And so what did that guy do? Of course, he was like, hey, do you want a job? And so he like looked me up and he reached out to me and had me come by his office. And I was like, actually, I just left HubSpot and I'm starting this company and here's what we're gonna do. And so he ended up being my first customer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Nanigans, a guy named Rick, who's the CEO. And they paid $45 a month. That was the first check. They signed it in paper. I think
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
First customer.
First customer, signed a check. I think it was on Christmas, day after Christmas or New Year's Eve, something like that. And then I had to go build the product. There was nothing. It was like I think I showed them an animated GIF that I recorded of like some HTML moving back and forth. And I was like, this is what you could get, $45 a month. And I think I wanted to charge them like $99 a month, and they were like, no. $45 a month. Yeah. Yeah, they're a little tight on the purse strings there.
But you take that and get the next customer, and next customer might pay you $99.
Yeah, that was the first 3 months, was just kind of figuring out what the product was going to be and talking to people. I did a little bit of consulting actually, trying to build onboarding experiences for a couple of companies and just figure out what the repeatable model was. And I didn't charge them anything, I just did it for free. But my pitch was like, hey, let me just see if I can improve your onboarding experience. And if I can, I'm going to take all that IP and I'm going to try to productize it. And some people were really cool about that.
Cool. So at the time when you were starting Appcues, you had mentioned your girlfriend, now wife, Connie. And one of the things that I've noticed about you and Connie's here today, is that I'm so impressed with how supportive you are of each other. And one of the things that is really difficult for founders to do is explain to other people what they're doing as they're trying to do it. And I just feel like there must be something that you and Connie figured out for like, I don't know, some communication tactics to figure out how to communicate that well. I ask this because oftentimes a lot of our peers that are founders, they have a lot of challenges keeping a steady relationship because of the demands of the startup. So I'm curious if you have any advice for founders that are starting companies that are dating somebody who isn't also a founder.
Are we starting we're starting a dating talk show now? I like it. We tried all kinds of things, and it definitely wasn't easy. I remember one of the first times we had a fight was I had saved up some money, and I think by the time we ended up raising, I had like $500 or less in the bank account, like not enough to make rent. And I was eating the same thing every day. Like the only luxury I afforded myself was I would buy coffee beans that I would make at home. And so I remember Connie came home and we were sharing budget at the time, and she bought like fresh herbs from Whole Foods, and it was like $4 a pack. And I was just like, why are we buying fresh herbs? Like we can't afford fresh herbs. And she was like, I'm gonna eat fresher, like I'm gonna eat good food, blah, 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 blah. Like I'll pay for it myself. And it was like $8. We were arguing over $8. So I wouldn't say that we've done it well. We've tried all kinds of stuff. At one point, we ended up creating a flow chart and we pasted up on the wall. And I was just like, at the end of a long day, sometimes I didn't want to just like dive into how you're doing or like how your day was. I was just like so stressed. And so I was like, hey, let's do, we had a big fight and we made a little flow chart. And I was like, just ask me how, if it was a long day. If it was a long day, then just give me a hug and like let me in a corner for 15 minutes and then I'll come back and we can sort of restart the flow chart. But believe me, it was just like really dumb things like that. I think it really came down to just acknowledging that it was a hard time. It was like, this sucks. Like, this is really hard. This is like not how it should be. And like a flow chart was the way to, I don't know, embody how dumb it was. Even though we use it sometimes as a joke, but we really didn't. It was just a way, and we would look at it and we would laugh and be like, man, remember how hard that was when we would need a flow chart to explain our emotions to each other. I feel like devices like that helped.
It's very mature of you, both.
I don't know, I think I've been able to, and both of us together have been able to get through like really tough things by trying to find the humor in it or find the comedy in it. And then by finding the comedy, you can sort of turn it into something positive. So if you just keep going down, like, this is like, I'm frustrated with you and like blah, 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 then you never really turn the corner on it.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, me and my co-founder, who's also my boyfriend, we've started 2 companies now together, and it is not an easy road, but I do recommend it to new founders. But I do want to say that we go to therapy every 2 weeks, and it's not something that we did at the beginning, it's something we kind of did later, and I kind of wish we had invested in that early on, because the more you let that relationship, I don't know, you like set it aside, we'll deal with it later, the like bigger the problems become.
Yeah, well, I respect it so much because you both have something that you care passionately about. It's almost like a little bit of a triangle. Like you care a lot about the product. As a founder, you put so much of your identity into the product, but you also have to balance that against like your relationship with each other. So, yeah, that must be really, I find it impressive.
All right, we're gonna go back now to Appcues. So you covered a little bit about like how did you decide what to build? How did you know that you had built something people wanted?
At the time, and something I learned from David Cancel was the best form of validation for B2B companies was if you get somebody to pay for something. And so with Nanigans, for instance, they're the first customer. I got them to pay before I ever wrote a single line of code. So they put money down, and I basically in 3 weeks tried to build out the whole product for them. And I did a similar thing, I think in January of that year, back when Product Hunt was still getting started and normal human beings could actually make the front page.
I remember those days.
That was a very short amount of time before the hype train found it. But a friend of mine posted it on there, and then it started getting upvoted. I think it was the number 3 of the day or something, number 2 of the day. And I just put up a quick splash page where I said hey, here's the value prop. I even used Connie's photo as a fake testimonial and stuff like that.
Nice.
And I was here's the value prop, here's what you get. Click, put in your email address and credit card information if you want to hold your place in line. So it wasn't just a Dropbox style, join the wait list. You actually had to put down a deposit of $45. I wouldn't charge your credit card, but upon delivery of actually getting the software, I was going to start you on a $45 a month subscription. So I got 16 people to do that in just a month. Without ever seeing the product, without ever knowing me, and it was really validating. But people actually took opened their wallets and said, "This is something I would be willing to pay money for," and then the building of it is trivial. I mean, relative to actually finding the market.
Mm-hmm. A common question that I get from new founders is I have this idea. How do I get money? Can you talk about how you raised funding for Appcues?
Yeah, the first $20,000 was just out of my own savings that I'd paid off all my student loans, saved up some money, and then just kind of put that in. And then after that, I think it was that same year that I left, 2013, left HubSpot. I ended up going to an event that was the first event in Boston that they held called Unpitch. And the entire intention was you sit at a table, it's 3 entrepreneurs and 1 investor, and you're not supposed to pitch. It's the anti-pitch. You're supposed to have a conversation and stuff like that.
What are you supposed to talk about? The weather?
Yeah, you're just talking about what you're working on and
okay.
how you get excited about it and stuff like that. But you're not supposed to be can you fund my company?
Okay.
When can I come pitch your partnership? And I was the only person at the table that actually did that. I didn't pitch this person. And his name is Jeff Fagnan, and I followed up and I was hey, thanks for your time. Really appreciated the insights. And he invited me to come back. And I think we built a really good connection there. And in that first meeting, and this was still, I think in January, it's 5 months out, 4 months out. And I was look, I really am not trying to raise money. And he was just tell me about what you're working on. And we started talking, and he said, right in that meeting, he was I really like you, I like what you're doing. He's I just want you to know that when you do want to raise money, I will personally invest. He's if I can't, and I would love to get the partnership to invest. But he just committed right there, verbally, that he would fund the first round. And then I went on for another 8 months or 6 months after that and just tried to find product market fit and get as far as I could before raising any money. And then I did call up Jeff and I was hey Jeff, I think I'm going to try to raise a round. Rick, the first customer, was the first check.
Nice.
Wrote a little seed, and I got David Cancel and Brian Halligan and all of those folks in. And then I went to Jeff and I was hey, I'm ready to raise a round. And he was I'm in. And he let me write the terms, which was really good. And David Cancel basically told me what terms to put down. So I got the terms that he would use if he was raising a round. So that all worked out. I had no idea what I was doing. But yeah, I was really fortunate in that way.
That's cool. And then hiring. How did you decide who to hire for the initial team?
Not very sophisticated. I actually failed through all of Appcues to hire one of my best friends. She's an incredible engineer. And it was actually one of the first tests of how good you are at pitching your company, is if you can hire somebody. And I really sucked at it. So good thing Jeff liked me as a person. Yeah, we had no pitch deck or anything like that. Jeff just kind of wrote a check. But the first person that through that process, actually, before we even raised money, I've been pitching at events. I finally was forget it, I'm just going to be a solo founder. I started pitching at events. And through that, I ended up meeting Jackson, my co-founder. He came on, I think at about month 8, I think, in the company. But so he and I found each other. We raised the round together. And then the first person that we hired was an engineer, this guy named Spencer. I really didn't know what we were looking for, but I met Spencer. He was really highly talked about. He had dropped out of high school and started working in startups, and so he was always around startups, really solid about it. And he was just the perfect type of generalist that we needed at that stage. But basically, I just started saying like, okay, it's all about product, right? I was a product person. We just started hiring engineers. Actually, one of the first people before Spencer, I take it back, who I hired was a salesperson that I pulled out of HubSpot. He was the one person that I was able to pull out of HubSpot, and I actually got an email from the CEO of HubSpot after that.
What do you say?
Oh man, it was just like a really dirt email. Not a dirt email, but he was just like, yo, I'm watching you kind of thing. It was like, heard about John. He was like, I think he said something like, you only get one. But David had told me, he was like, hey, the number one person you can hire is a salesperson because they're going to pick up the phone every day and try to sell your product to customers. And the feedback that you're going to get is going to be worth it. And so, yeah, I hired John, and I was just like, employee number one, go talk to people, try to get this out into the market. And every time you fail and every time you succeed, like I want you to tell us, and we'll make the product better. So yeah, he was actually the first employee, and then some engineers and stuff like that came after.
So you went from 1 to 2, and then 2 to like 10, and eventually, how big is the company today?
Company today, I should know this exact number because I'm still on the board. I think we're in the mid 60s, high 70s. We got up to just under, or tracking to 100, and then COVID. And then so we tracked it a little bit, which actually ended up being a blessing in disguise to let us get our fundamentals in shape. And now, yeah, the company is starting to scale back up. We just closed around December of last year.
Congratulations.
All the teams work. I really had nothing to do with it. Yeah, I've been out of the company for now 2 years, but just still rooting for the team.
How did you feel you had to personally change to meet the needs of Appcues as it was growing?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things about being a startup founder or being CEO is you get to be really good at something. You get to do a job for 6 months, and just at the point at which you feel like you're starting to get good at it, you have to give it up to somebody else, and your job changes. It's like, initially you're like, oh, I'm going to start writing code and like building product, and you start getting really good at it, and you're like writing code every single day, and you're like pushing up all these commits. And then you have to give it away to somebody else, and you'd be like, now you are going to do that really rewarding thing that I was doing yesterday. And I'm going to go focus on hiring and be the worst recruiter in the company. And I'm going to do that for 6 months. And then the second you get good at it, yeah, now you have to do fundraising or do this other stuff. And it's really taxing because you never get to specialize in anything. You just have to be a generalist, I think. Eventually I got used to it, but it was really hard as an adjustment early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel that. Every day I'm coding, but I'm like, I know that like in a few weeks, maybe even tomorrow, somebody's gonna show up and I'm gonna be like, now my job is different. And I'm gonna be like so sad, but this is life.
Yeah, I envy you and Denny because you get to, like you can look at the end of the day and be like, I made this, Once you start abstracting, you're like, I guess I have to measure my performance in terms of how happy people are, like how effective they are. And it's just harder to see. It is like rewarding in a different way. But I gotta admit, there's something nice about like merging code to production and seeing those tests pass.
I made a button and it does something.
Yeah.
So then coming home to Hawaii, you could have easily started another company, but you chose another path for the time being. I still hope that you start another company. Can you talk about the urgency of climate change and what your views are on that?
Yeah. So, in terms of starting another company, and we've talked about this before too, but like in the process of like making something or running a company, like you pick up all of these other skills along the way. And my 25-year-old self at the time was like, oh my God, the biggest problem that I can solve right now is how to make UIs less sucky, right? That was like the biggest thing that I thought I could contribute out to the world. Like B2B software UIs are not good enough, and like I'm gonna make that better. And it was cool because what I got really excited about was it wasn't lead generation or anything like that, and it was something that actually my mom could benefit from. So that was what really drove me. And then through that process, I'm like, wow, I could do other stuff now. Like I know how to hire people or like run a sales funnel. I can do other things, and it's hard to think of like a bigger way to apply those skill sets in a positive impact way than climate change right now. So that's kind of what led me to that. It was like, what else could I possibly work on that would be the best use of my skills at this moment.
Then how did that lead you to where you're working at now?
Well, I was going down this route where it's like, okay, I want to work on climate change. It seems like everything out there was, you basically had to be like a PhD in astrophysics or something like that. Like you had to be able to turn carbon atoms into tables somehow. And so I was going down this route. I was like, okay, cool. I can't do anything about climate change. Maybe the next best thing is I can start a company and take the cash and like invest it in climate startups. I actually went down that route. I technically incorporated a company. It just is like way too easy to incorporate companies. And then like a month or two after that, I think a friend of mine had sent me an email or a note about Terraformation. And the thing I cared a lot about was like, okay, I'm here in Hawaii. I really care about Hawaii. I want to create jobs in Hawaii. I want to see the economy. I want to see everything here in Hawaii get better and improve. And I loved that Terraformation had a really simple approach. I loved that they were based in Hawaii and had a lot of people in Hawaii. I loved that they're doing native reforestation of Hawaii Island. And so I was like, and they're doing climate change. I was like, wow, and they already raised money. I don't have to do any of that stuff. Like that stuff's actually not very fun. Like making the thing is way more fun than pitching investors. And so if I didn't have to do that, that would be even better. So, and I took a look at it and I think I let it go. And then Ishan and I ended up being on a talk or on a panel for like youth entrepreneurs in high school. And they were like, hey, you two both really like the same topics. Like you guys should talk. And so Ishan and I got together. We ended up spending a lot of time together in Big Island one day. And they just had a fit at the moment. Their head of product was transitioning out, and I was pretty open about what role I'd be able to contribute to. So I ended up aligning, and they're like, hey, yeah, you should join.
Sometimes the stars just align.
Yeah.
So one of the things Denny and I have been talking about recently is how effective activism oftentimes doesn't require some kind of like really flashy or showy thing or some really like rocket science-y thing. Oftentimes the best forms of activism are when you do something that anybody else can do, like plant a tree. And so I'm curious if you can talk more about Terraformations Mission and why planting trees is maybe one of our best, our best bets to creating the future that we desire.
Yeah, I think of it as, like, okay, say we wanted to put all of our eggs into this science fiction basket. Like, would that reasonably work? And I think the answer is no. Like, this is a problem that affects everybody. And just the amount of apathy out there, because we think like, someone else is going to solve that with like, I don't know, some crazy booster rocket that's going to block the sun out or something like that. And the apathy won't change behavior. Like we'll still find ourselves in the same place that we do now. And so, like I think what's great about trees, not only are they the best carbon sink that we have or like the best carbon sequester that we have, but it is something that everybody can do. And it's actually something that, because it's something everyone can do, you can give somebody a job and make them part of the solution rather than either part of the problem or just completely apathetic in the middle. Even if actually planting an extra tree in your backyard won't really have an impact, like there are designated regions in the world where carbon sequestration has like more effectiveness than others. Like there's all this stuff about soil carbons and how that, biodiversity and all the nuances that go into it. And it actually doesn't matter. Like what matters is that people care. And if they take that first step, then they can take more steps. And if you average it out, like I think if we allocated a quota to every human being on the world, it's 150 trees each. You can do that, over a 10-year period. You could plant 15 trees a year. Like that's easy. So it is something that everybody can contribute to, and I think just giving permission to people to be part of the solution is the biggest message I think that Terraformation sends. In addition, we do want to actually solve climate change. So, but it's like we may not even be the perfect solution or the solution that ends up eking out, but if we can enable or inspire other people to contribute to it, then I feel more confident that we'll get there.
It's almost like you're manufacturing hope.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So if people in the audience wanted to get started planting their 15 trees a year, what could they do?
Ooh, the biggest thing right now that we are, that we're building a lot of conviction around is seeds. So collecting seeds, storing seeds, especially stuff that is native to your area, that's a way that people can contribute. And just like banking native seeds and storing them. Those seeds can then go out and be used in the future. So maybe you don't want to plant it in your backyard, but maybe there's a seed bank or a reforestation project that is going to need those seeds in the future. One of the things that we found, for instance, in doing some of these projects is that you really want to build up like if you're going to plant 100,000 trees, you're going to need at least twice as many seeds. Right? And you're not going to have those on day one when you walk onto the field. You really want to have a lot of those seeds built up. You want to have the seeds built up, you want them to go in a nursery, and you want to plant these trees. And so when you start backing into this 10-year goal of planting all these trees, it really starts years before the trees go into the ground. And so by enabling everybody to contribute to the availability of seeds, you actually make it possible for some of these other things to happen downstream, like planting a ton of trees.
All right. So collect seeds.
Collect
and then
seeds.
when the seeds are needed, you can plant the trees. I think we have time for one question, if there's a question from the audience, and if not, that's okay too. I think there are no questions. Oh, question.
Okay, so I have a question about the investment part. You said that you could have gotten an investment, but then you waited and you decided to look for product market fit. Can you go into it a little bit more? Because I feel like some people would be like, why? Why did you just take the money? You know?
So the question was, you had an opportunity to take money, but you chose to find product market fit before taking the money. Why?
Yeah, Dharmesh actually at HubSpot said something that was really, I try to remember all the time, which is raise money when you're in a point of strength. Like most people don't do that, and they actually try to raise money when they're at a point of weakness. And you get the best terms when you raise at a point of strength. And yeah, because I was in a position where I didn't need it, but I also didn't have any traction. I didn't have anything to say like, this is why I need these really great terms. You know, I mean, I had $20,000. It wasn't going to take me very far. But if I can go back to them and say, hey, here's how much I've validated. Here's like 20 people or 50 people who put their credit cards down and said they're going to pay for this. That was a lot more leverage, and I could use that in a negotiation. Even for myself too, I didn't really exactly know what I was going to do or how far I was going to take it. And so I thought of it as just like, okay, before I ask somebody else to put a ton of money into this, we raised $1.2 million. Like it was a lot of runway for us. Before I can even ask somebody to put that much money in, I have to have personal conviction that there even is something here.
Connie.
If you are interested in fundraising, what do you think are the 3 most important things investors look for?
If you're interested in fundraising, what are the 3 most important things investors look for?
I think the main thing is, especially if it's initial funding, they care about the founders first and foremost. Like honestly, all the 3 things should just be about the founder, because all of the ideas will change, markets will change, but the only thing that'll be consistent that they're going to put money behind is going to be the founders. So just coming off as formidable and feeling like this is going to happen regardless of whether or not they get money, like make it seem inevitable. Paul Graham writes about that, right? Inevitability or formidability. And then just like knowing your market cold. So just saying like, I'm the best at this thing. I know this in and out. And here's specifically the reason why I'm the best person out of anybody else to go do this. I think if you have those 3 things, then it makes it a lot easier for somebody to want to put money behind you.
Looking back,
Yeah, go ahead.
Looking back, is there any, or what's the thing that you'd like to change the most of how you've done things so far? Like, do you think, oh, maybe I could have waited and not gotten any funding at all, or maybe I could have? Is there anything that you would say, really, this should have done differently?
Looking back on your experiences, is there something you would have done differently or changed?
I think there are things that I would do differently a second time around, knowing what I know now. But those would be things I think different from what the me of the time would do. I don't really regret a lot. I think the one thing that I regret, I remember just like having this interaction with a friend of mine who ran a company, and I don't know, I was just really frustrated. I was using their product for customer support, and we were starting to pay a lot of money for it. And I was under so much pressure, and I was just like, I don't know, I'd send an email to this customer support. I was like, why does this product still not do this like one thing that like everyone else does? Like this is the worst. And he responded, and he was like, it went to a regular customer support person on his team, but he found it and he responded, and he was like, hey man, are we still friends? Like, you just like basically took it out on my team over a totally impersonal channel. And I was like, oh man, I feel terrible about that. And it had nothing to do with their product. It was actually me manifesting, I think, my own frustrations with kind of where we were and like where the product was. And I think letting those frustrations just like bubble up internally rather than like finding a safe outlet for them. I think that's happened maybe 1 or 2 other times in the course of the history, and I think that if I could do something differently, it would be, yeah, just try to find ways to relieve stress in a healthy way rather than an unhealthy way.
I think Armin has a question.
Okay. Is that Richard?
Yeah.
Oh, go for it.
Hey, Jonathan. I just wanted to ask, what was it like transitioning from being founder of your own company to moving into head of product at Terraformation? Can you discuss like how that transition felt to you personally, and also how the role was similar or maybe dissimilar?
Yeah. My wife and I actually would talk about this a lot, and we were like, I was like, I don't think I could ever work for anybody again. I just like, yeah, when, pros and cons, I think, of being a CEO or a founder, which is like, you can make any decision you want. You have all of the autonomy out there, and the downside is every problem is your problem. But I think I liked that amount of autonomy, and I was like, yeah, there's no way I could work for anybody else. I think for me, I knew that with climate change, it's a problem that's just bigger than me. Like I took a company to double-digit millions, and but like for this problem, like even if it's $1 per tree and we want to plant 1 trillion trees, like that's $1 trillion. And so there was no way I was going to do it on my own. There was no way I had the skills to do that. And so it was really just about finding, like, okay, what's the best platform that gives me the best shot, and where can I add the most value? So I tried to be really humble about that part of it. Yeah,
Cool.
I'm also just really grateful that they value entrepreneurs, because I don't know, sometimes I feel like I just go and I make a mess of stuff and I don't know, start doing things, but I think they actually value that.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
All right, Tracy, are we out of time, or
We're out of time. We have
one more question? At what point did you decide to hire a sales manager? Was it after you had achieved product market fit?
Ooh. Well, we hired a salesperson initially, so he was just an individual contributor. The part at which we started hiring a sales manager, we actually waited really long. All of our leads came inbound, and I think he hired 2 people, and we tried them out at the same time. But he, essentially that first person that we had, got promoted into a sales manager. Someone out in assessment, like most, I think, startup promotions, it's like battlefield promotions.
And how long were you doing sales management before you hired the guy from HubSpot?
Oh, I hired him, I mean, right as we were raising the round, so probably like 9, 10 months in.
And had you achieved product market fit at that point?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think product market fit's really like $1 million in revenue, the one benchmark that's out there. I think we were doing like $30,000. So the intention was like not to actually try to scale what he was doing or what I was doing. It was really just like, if we were trying to scale anything, it was just learning. Scaling, actually acquiring revenue came later.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. If
Yeah, thank you.
anyone here on Zoom or here has questions about starting a company, you want to start a company, you're not sure, you can always email me or Jonathan. Jonathan's email is jonathan@terraformation.com, and my email is cindy@jellypbc.com, or you can find me on Twitter @CindyWoo. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.